education and peace heroes and heroines are doing extraordinary things in the world, and oftentimes we don't hear about it at time. I would like this video to be shared and expose people to different possibilities, to different options of education. These tools and practices are working on human rights, gender equality, mediation processes. So we are meeting in Basel, which represent a true culture of peace for me. It's between 3 countries, and it was able to be in the eye of a storm for as long as European history exists. This house is the place where Prussia and France signed a peace agreement, or an agreement that divided the Rhine between those 2 countries.
I was growing up in a post-conflict era, and my family had been impacted by partition of India, the 1947 partition. And I grew up hearing stories about the other side, how the other side had massacred them, had raped their women, had looted their homes, and had displaced them basically and made them refugees. So I grew up with a lot of hate for the other side, and my history textbooks also reinforced that image. But for the first time when I came for my further studies to the US, I met somebody from the other side. And when we started sharing our personal stories, I realized that the victims on my side were actually the perpetrators on her side. And those sort of the connections that we started making through that sharing, I thought there was much more there. And we started working together and really began to work with youth and educators around building spaces and platforms where people could share those personal stories across conflict, not just within their conflict, because it was about opening those boundaries.
I work these days a lot with politicians and political advisors in Eastern Europe, in post-Soviet countries of Eastern Europe. And so the challenge is, how does one translate peace education methodologies to working with people who clearly feel that they're already very well educated and fully prepared for their tasks at hand. So we've been working together with a great team on creating what we call peer exchange opportunities to learn from other contexts, from other peace processes and other conflict resolution processes, and to be able to apply the lessons that others have identified, the mistakes that others have made and the successes that others have had, to the situations in post-Soviet Eastern Europe.
What's very important to me is that societies can learn from each other. So we can indeed look at how situations of conflicts and violence are handled in other societies, other cultures. This is something that happened already back in the 50s, when the US civil rights movements looked at a very different part of the globe in order to set up their own instruments of civil resistance, namely to Gandhi's India. And at that time it wasn't really, it was an exploration, and it was not something automatic. Nowadays we say Gandhi and Martin Luther King, etc. But when it started, it was something completely new, and it was a learning from a very different societal experience.
The purpose of the symposium is to bring people who are doing diverse peace, gender, human rights, mediation work together to exchange ideas, to deconstruct different prejudices and stereotypes we have on ourselves, and reconstruct them in relation to the relationships that we are able to create here. So to exchange views and theories and translate them together to how it manifests in actual practice.
My work has primarily been dealing with ethnic conflict, a deeply intractable conflict that has gone on for so long. And one of the outcomes of it going on for so long is that people assume that there is no end. and therefore one of the prevailing cultures is that of fatalism. And the role of the educator in a case like that is, how do you overcome fatalism? What language can you use that will give people the comfort that perhaps they can stop contemplating their navels and begin to look above the parapet?
What is important about our work is that in Cyprus there is a wall. What we do is not actually to deconstruct the wall, because this is very difficult. There are contextual conditions that do not allow us as civil society to bring about structural changes at this point. But what we do is that we remove the first brick so that people can have a peek at each other and start feeling that, okay, the people who live on the other side of the buffer zone, on the other side of the checkpoint, they are people with us, we have similarities, but we also have a lot of differences that we have to celebrate, accept, and use to enrich our lives, our personalities, our everyday practices.
One very successful example is to send our members, and these are women from local level, whom we put together with a high delegation at the highest level on the continent, to go to Tanzania, where Tanzania has an issue with its border. It's actually a river which keeps moving and shifting. So that means that the populations are actually very confused and the resources are confused. Are they for Tanzania this season? And then the next season, is it Malawi, the neighbor? And it was very interesting that the two governments I'm talking about asked for the women members of FemWise to stay within the room and hammer out the solution, and they asked the high delegation to kindly move out of the room, and they kept the women.
My educational background is art, political science, gender and peace education, but it's also my passions. We were trying to bring together different innovating tools that use different forms of art and crafts and ideas into peace education, gender work, and intersectional analysis. So for example, Gordon Mitchell used pictures that people took and created speech bubbles to change the discourse about how we talk about it and how do we evaluate it. What did we say and what didn't we say, and allow people to have a second chance integrating the things that they didn't say in writing.
I mainly want to focus on different issues that I'm dealing with when I'm teaching MA courses. So our MA students are a very diverse bunch of people. They often come from families who don't have an academic background, meaning they are first generation. And that makes a whole different issues around language and how you make academic language, concept, jargon accessible to those who don't necessarily had that background in their previous studies or in the family background, class background, and so on and so forth.
We all, depending on our context, have different things that give us power and privilege or take away power and privilege. For example, race, social class, gender, sexuality, able-bodied, different abilities, all these kinds of categories, and they contribute to how society sees us and how we exist within society.
The challenge is to convince teachers about the value and the importance and the relevance of inclusion and inclusive education, because most of the teachers are feeling very stressed because they have a lot of responsibilities. They don't know how to deal with the heterogeneity in the class.
So part of what I try to do in my peace education work is really engage my students in that conversation. And what does power and privilege look like in your space? And what does social justice look like in that space? And what can we do for social justice in order to achieve those goals?
So this is something that I was really, I really dealt with in the past few years, and trying to be reflective of thinking of how to make language accessible, non-exclusive to those who don't have access to it, but without reducing the level of the conversation without dumbing down the conversation.
I'm trying to translate a pedagogy of space into organized tours that I'm conducting. And we are going to visit a place, a Christmas market, and we're going to conduct a race, ethnic, religion, gender, age, status, and ability analysis, and see how those characteristics and theories are translated to different elements within the Christmas market. Where do you feel safe? Where do you feel unsafe? What access do you have and control you have to different things that are sold or shared or given within the Christmas market? What food can you eat and what foods can't you eat? And is there an option for people who are, for example, keeping a halal belief or kosher diet? How many children are in the Christmas market and who takes responsibility on them and why? Do people with wheelchair or with mental disabilities are welcome at the Christmas market? Do we see people from diverse ethnicities and background, diverse ages? Do we see only heterosexual families or also homosexual families? In what way they're perceiving the Christmas market? So we're going to take all of that and we'll intersect it with ethnicity and race and see what comes up from that, and talk about spaces and what kind of educational lessons we learn and teach within spaces. So I encounter a problem in my work, which is antagonism towards gender discourse, gender analysis, and even the concept of gender. I'm using practical educational methodology that I invented to counter that, where I invite people to give a gender analysis to a daily object. They bring whatever object they use, from shaving razors to knife to hamburger to cigarettes and Coca-Cola bottle, and see how it influenced and influencing men and women differently. The gender analysis for everyday object allow me as a professor and my students to integrate gender discourse within the curriculum of our class, but also within their daily life, in their activism, in peace negotiations, see what kind of access men and women have to the same situation and how the same situation affect them fundamentally different.
אני עוסקת בהכשרת מורים בישראל. ואחד התחומים שככה במשך השנים הבנתי את החשיבות שלו זה תוכנית הלימודים הסמויה. אחת השאלות שמעניין לשאול למשל היא מי לא מיוצג בחוברות העבודה. אנחנו כמעט ולא נראה אנשים עם נכויות בחוברות העבודה. בחוברות עבודה של ילדים יהודים לא נראה כמעט ערבים. שאלה נוספת שאפשר לשאול, איך מאופיינות הדמויות? אנחנו רואים אפיונים מאוד ברורים של בנות עם חצאיות ובגדים ורודים, שאוהבות לשחק משחקים מסוימים שנחשבים משחקים של בנות, ואנחנו רואים בנים עם בגדים של בנים עוסקים בספורט של בנים. אנחנו נראה הרבה פעמים את המגדר מופיע גם בעיסוקים של ההורים. אמהות מבשלות, אמהות נמצאות בבית, אמהות לוקחות ילדים מבית הספר, מחזירות ילדים מבית הספר. זה סוג נוסף של מסרים.
Karama has been running for 17 years, a program for women. They call it the Leadership and Law Summer Program, LLSP, in Washington, D.C. The program brings women from all over the world to learn about how to understand the Islamic Sharia, especially when it applies to women issues. One of the women who attended in one of the years, who was suffering from being in an abusive relationship, and being forced to stay in the relationship under the impression that a good Muslim woman should accept such a situation, came out of this program realizing that I am a good woman when I stand up for myself and not to accept to stay in an abusive relationship. And those were the steps that she took afterwards. We are continuously struggling with patriarchy on every level. Patriarchy is not only in the books and in the jurisprudence, it's also in the societal culture influences that may get in the way of spreading the word of Karama or raising doubt about its authenticity and about the appropriateness of what we are doing.
I'm extremely grateful to the Arnhold program and to Henry and Georg Arnhold, who established this foundation and allow people like me to come and reflect on their work and try to come up with more innovative, creative practices that promote human rights and sustainable peace.